people are homeless because there are too many houses, when people are hungry because there's too much food, how do they solve it? Well, first of all, they destroy in mass. There is mass destruction of productive forces. Then they conquer new markets. They seize control of new markets. And then they have more thorough exploitation of the old ones, meaning they drive everyone's wages down in order to get more profit out of them than before. And all of this paves the way for a bigger crisis next time. The crisis is going to be even bigger the next time, and it makes it harder to resolve it the next time, right? This is the built-in problem. So if you have this frequent problem of gluts on the market, of the market breaking down because there's too much wealth that's being created, what do you ultimately have to do? Well, you have to start finding more people to buy your products. You have to start seizing new territories. And this is what gave birth to the economic system of imperialism, right? Is that they began seizing countries and using them as captive markets. Imperialism, capitalism moved from this stage of industrialization to what we now live under. We talk about globalism, imperialism. Bankers became dominant over industrialists and factory owners. We read history in America. They talk about Andrew Carnegie, the steel manufacturer. You talk about Henry Ford, but it's bankers and financiers that are dominant, and that what they do is they go around the world and they seize sections of the world as captive markets, force them to buy their products. Great example is NAFTA. Mexico has been growing its own food since before Christopher Columbus showed up. But if you go to Mexico now and you buy food, you're going to be buying it from an American agribusiness corporation. And instead of having a glut on the market, instead of Mexico growing its own food, now they buy food from us. And that deals with this problem of overproduction. You dump your products on developing countries. Nigeria is a country on the African continent. It's the top oil exporting country in Africa. So you'd think it'd be the wealthiest country. They're selling the most of this very valuable commodity, oil. But Nigeria is deeply impoverished because the oil of Nigeria belongs to ExxonMobil, BP, Shell, and Chevron. And when the people in Nigeria are purchasing products, they're purchasing them from British corporations, American corporations, French corporations, etc. Nigeria has been kept impoverished as a captive market. The products are being dumped on them. And that imperialism, and we're not going to read the whole quote, but imperialism is a new stage. And Lenin called it imperialism. Other people call it globalism. You talk about the global financial system, the rule of the world by Wall Street. This is the system that we currently live under, and it's dominating the world. Globalism, imperialism. And it's not competitive capitalism. You have big multinational corporations that are tied in with big banks that are dominating the whole world, and the way they're holding on to their power is by holding back development, is by keeping countries in poverty. If countries start lifting themselves up and developing their own resources and having their own industries, then they're competitors. And if you look at all the countries that we tend to not like, that we're told are evil in the United States, they're countries that have developed their own industries and become competitors. Think about it, right? China, for example. China, we're told to hate China. Well, China, their Huawei Technologies makes way better phones than Apple does. Huawei Technologies, their phones are way better. And they would rather that China be deeply impoverished and not have the world's largest telecommunications manufacturer and have the whole world be buying their phones from iPhone or Apple or Samsung or Western corporations. But China lifted itself up. Oil is a huge, valuable commodity on the international markets. And the countries the USA has invaded, Iraq, Libya, and you look at Venezuela, these are countries that have taken control of their oil and are competing on the international market, selling their oil in competition. Iran, a great example, right? This is an oil-rich country that's selling its oil in competition with Wall Street. And the idea is they want dominance, and they don't want competition. They want countries that are deeply impoverished, captive markets in order to maximize profits for Wall Street. And there's a fundamental difference between a banker and an industrialist, right? Your factory owner, he wants to maximize his own profits, and he might be very ruthless to his own workers and treat them horrifically in order to soak in a huge amount of wealth. But at the same time, he does want people to be able to buy his products, right? He wants to sell as many products as he possibly can. If people are wealthier, they can buy his products. But a banker is different. A banker doesn't make money by selling products. A banker makes money by people being in debt. And when people are poorer, they're more in debt. And in fact, the poorer society gets, the wealthier the banker becomes. So there's a fundamental difference between a banker and an industrialist. And if you look at every major religion in history has forbidden the lending of money at interest. because the banker becomes a creditor, becomes someone that the entire economy is centered around. He's creating wealth without any real value being produced. Usury, a speculation, where wealth can be created without any real value being created. Fictitious capital. And that's what our economy is basically centered around. Globalism, imperialism is centered around fictitious capital and the profits of financiers and bankers who do not have an interest in society overall becoming wealthier. And that's an important point. So that's stage number 3. We're talking about globalism, imperialism.
That's a question, Caleb.
Go ahead.
How does the World Bank play a role in this?
Well, the World Bank is infamous for going to countries that are impoverished and saying, we'll give you a loan to help you develop.
Right.
But in exchange for your loan, you have to let us set your economic policies. You have to let us tell you how to run your economy. And in Latin America in the 90s, they were particularly ruthless. I went to Ecuador when I was a kid. When I was 12 years old, I visited Ecuador with my dad. He was leading nature tours in the Galapagos Island. I went to Quito, Ecuador, and I had never seen that many starving people. There was desperate poverty like I'd never seen. And I was in shock. They were in the middle of an economic crisis. Hundreds of thousands of people were dying of malnutrition. Why? Because Ecuador had been forced by the World Bank, in order to get their development loans, to sell off their state-run oil company. And on top of that, they've been forced to give up their own currency and adopt the US dollar as their currency. And so they got rid of their currency and they sold off their oil. And then there was, they talked about, I think they called it El Nino, there were some weather patterns that were not right, and people started starving en masse. And it was a man-made famine created by the World Bank, created by neoliberalism. But there's many examples of that. Bolivia, they privatized their water. They sold their water to American corporations in exchange for getting their loans from the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. And there's many examples of this. When you talk about neoliberalism, in the 90s, after the fall of the Soviet Union, the World Bank was particularly vicious in forcing developing countries to privatize their resources and just allow their economy to just be completely dominated by Western corporations. So when you talk about the World Bank, that's what we're discussing. The World Bank was created at the Bretton Woods. After World War II, there was a gathering at Bretton Woods where they created the International Monetary Fund, the World Trade Organization, and the World Bank as the institutions that would be kind of the alternative to then the Soviet-aligned world was called Comecon, or the communist economy, and then you had the Bretton Woods institutions. And after the fall of the Soviet Union, they became particularly vicious in forcing developing countries to give up and have their economies crushed. But out of all of this, we get another stage. And this is, so globalism, imperialism, it has this constant problem of the wealthier society becomes, the more technology advances, the more unstable the economy gets. And it has to enforce its will by dominating new markets, beating down countries. We invaded Iraq, we invaded Libya, we destroyed Libya. Rosa Luxemburg, who was a German who was opposed to World War I. At the time World War I was happening, she made a prediction, and it's in the packet here if you want to read what Rosa Luxemburg wrote. This is what she predicted in 1914 as World War I was breaking out.
Regarding World War I, Rosa Luxemburg said this in 1914, quote, "This world war is a regression into barbarism. The triumph of imperialism leads to the annihilation of civilization. At first, this happens sporadically for the duration of a modern war. But then when the period of unlimited wars begins, it progresses towards its inevitable consequences, the triumph of imperialism and the collapse of all civilization, as in ancient Rome, depopulation, desolation, degeneration, a great cemetery."